It's Thursday, April 13th, and we are just 2 weeks away from the Carolina Panthers kicking this whole NFL draft thing off. And as you know by now, if you've been listening along with our draft prep, joining me every Thursday leading up to round one, it's our very own Charles McDonald. Chuck, what's going on, buddy?
I'm all right. You know, we are, 2 weeks away from the draft? 3? 2?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Okay.
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks. Thank goodness. That's all I'll say. Look, I feel like every time we get on women's podcast, it turns into like a retroactive of how we got to this point because it's all connected to the draft. And holy shit, I forgot how much work draft prep is. But yeah, if you're interested in all types of draft stuff, mock drafts, player rankings, reporting, you can definitely follow what we're doing on Yahoo Sports. We got you covered.
Yeah, man. Charles is nose to the grindstone with this whole draft thing, which has been awesome to see. Maybe not awesome for your outside time, but definitely, good for the people out there to get your takes and stuff. I will say we are definitely at last night I hopped on Twitter for a real quick second and noticed that my entire timeline is discussing the S2 cognitive test or whatever. Which
I have no idea what that is still.
I was going to say about a month ago, I would have never been able to tell you what that was. Now I just basically understand that it's a processing information test allegedly. And Brock Purdy was really good in it last year. So that's, I guess, got people thinking oh, maybe this is the skeleton key to quarterback evaluations, which is where that we've jumped the shark with the whole draft thing, as you said. So 2 weeks away, that is going to be great to finally get this thing over with. And, it's going to be great today, Charles, because we get to dive into maybe the most perplexing and polarizing position of this draft class, and a position, honestly, I'm really eager to learn about all of these guys for the first time today. The wide receivers, man. I can't wait for you to tell me about all of these guys that I definitely don't have any preconceived notions on. This is going to be great.
I thought you were going to tell them about me. Yeah. I'm interviewing you today.
Yeah. No, I got a lot to say about this receiver class as a whole and these individual players. And we'll get to all that. But first, quick bit of news item. Since this is a wide receiver focused podcast, I figured we can talk about one of the biggest news at the wide receiver position of the week. And it's not Odell Beckham signing in Baltimore. He did his introductory press conference today. It's actually what happens with the next potential veteran receiver move, which is DeAndre Hopkins. According to SI's Albert Breer, the Jets are, quote, conditionally interested in DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know what that means. Obviously, that could be a pressing need after, they did not land Odell Beckham. He signed with the Ravens before even getting on the plane to go see the Jets. I think what's interesting about this DeAndre Hopkins thing, Charles, is that I think he's probably going to end up being a draft day trade. And my question to you before we talk about these receiver prospects, if you're a contender, would you rather trade for DeAndre Hopkins or would you rather take a chance on a guy in the draft?
Man, I feel like it kind of depends on where you are right now, right? Because I think the big thing with Hopkins is you got to work out the contract and what that looks like for any team acquiring him, because it's not like he's, one of these guys that's on a cheap deal right now. He was brought into Arizona to be a franchise wide receiver, and then some Cardinals stuff happened, and I don't think that it's his fault, but it hasn't quite been, I don't think, the marriage that he was hoping it would be when he was traded to Arizona and ended up receiving that deal. So, I think, the conditional part, I'm assuming, has to do with them landing Aaron Rodgers. Because I don't really see why this would be an appealing situation for really either party if they don't land Aaron Rodgers. Because once you get Aaron Rodgers or are on the finish line, or as Joe Douglas said at a fan event a week or two ago or a week and a half ago, he's coming. Aaron Rodgers is definitely coming, which is an interesting tactic when you don't have Aaron Rodgers just yet.
Yeah.
But that could be a whole other podcast on its own. But, once you get Aaron Rodgers, the clock accelerates on what you're trying to do. Basically, you're trying to win a Super Bowl this year. So, yeah, if you can get Aaron Rodgers, hell yeah, trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Then you're looking at Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, and DeAndre Hopkins with Aaron Rodgers. That's, about as good as the Jets can get at this point in the offseason. So, conditionally interested, I think, makes sense.
I mean, I've said this about the Jets that after they traded Elijah Moore, I'm a lot less excited about this receiver room. I don't think it's bad or anything, but you have Garrett Wilson as your legit number one that you're going to feed 140, 150 targets to. And I think he's capable of being that guy. But Lazard is like a passable number 2, probably better as a number 3. And like, are you really going to play McCole Hardman as your full-time slot receiver? He's like kind of a gadget guy. So I do get the Jets as a landing spot here. And I think we can transition this into the draft class. The reason that I think Hopkins might be appealing for a team like the Jets or anybody out there is that he is still at this point in his career a legit X receiver, like a big body who can go up and get it, who I think is underrated as a separator and underrated as a route runner, but a guy who can obviously high point the football and play tethered to the line of scrimmage, not like any sort of move around slot stuff, although he did a little bit of slot stuff with the Cardinals last year. And when you look at this class, Charles, there's not a lot of guys that can play that number 1 X receiver type role. So I think for a team that's looking for a big body X, that might make the Hopkins thing a little more plausible.
Yeah, and it's looking for a quick fix too, right? Because you don't have to wait for him to develop. You don't have to wait for him to get up to speed. You're kind of just hoping you can tap back into what he was, where, there was a stretch where he was considered an elite dominant receiver, especially with the Texans. I remember when we were going back to the trade when it did happen, the whole discourse was like, holy crap, Bill O'Brien, you got fleeced here. Like
a second round pick and David Johnson, clearly declining, overpaid David Johnson.
Yeah. And to be clear, that was still a terrible trade for the Texans.
Yes.
Because they didn't really get anything out of that. But I think he's one of those guys where he's not cooked, but it's probably going to take like the right situation for him to end up like being able to tap into, some of the stuff that made him so dominant in the past. And I kind of think if you can get Aaron Rodgers, like a situation like the Jets might be perfect for him and for what they have already with the Jets, where, you wouldn't need Garrett Wilson to take on like a 200 target season or something like that. You can really spread the wealth around. And I think that would make their offense even more dynamic than at least what they have on paper if Aaron Rodgers is there. If Aaron Rodgers isn't there, that's like still one of the worst offenses in the league.
Yeah.
Like,
what are they gonna, they're just going to roll out Zach Wilson. Like that's the thing with the whole Aaron Rodgers part is like they've got to get this done. It has to happen. Or I guess they're trading up into the top 10 with one of these. Like maybe they're a team to move to 3. I don't know. Yeah, the Jets are just a whole other weird thing right now. I think Hopkins also fits with a team like Kansas City, who could use a legitimate X receiver. Like there's a lot of places where he'd fit based on the adjustment of the contract and what it would cost to trade for him. But yeah, he's been good with the Cardinals too when he's been on the field, but the last couple of years have been mired by injuries and the PED suspension. So yeah, I think it's time for these two to part ways, that's for sure. And I think it does happen on draft day. So getting into the receiver class, what do you think about this class compared to like 2020 to 2022? I know the discourse is that it's a weaker class. There are plenty of rumors, like Jim Nagy said that, he sees a bunch of receivers mocked in the first round by the media, but most of the teams he talked to believes that like only one could go in the first round, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. There's only like one true round 1 grade receiver, which is JSN. So how do you feel like this class compares to the last few ones that we've seen?
I think it's kind of similar to like the running back class we talked about last week, where maybe there aren't like a whole bunch of like true, dominant number 1s, but I think that there's a lot of guys that can play like specific roles within offense. Like we talk about Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I think like it's not. If you're looking at him as like an X, no, it's not great. But like if you're thinking about him like a slot type receiver, then it's about as good as a prospect profile I think you can get for JSN. So, and that applies to guys like Quentin Johnston too, who has his own specific strengths. You got Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers. It's like there aren't, to me at least, not like dominant number 1s, but a lot of guys where you draft them, you're like, okay, that was a really quality addition to our receiver room. And I don't think it makes the class bad. I think it kind of gives it depth without having like a superstar at the top.
Yeah, I think the meat of this class will come maybe late round 1, but all the way to like round 3. There's a lot of players in that tier that I think, again, if you're looking for role players, if you're looking for guys to be your number 2, your number 3, like your flanker, your slot, stuff like that, even some guys that I think can play X receiver on day 2, there's plenty of options there if you're looking for that. It's kind of similar to 2019, maybe from a structural standpoint, where 2 receivers went in the first round in 2019. It was Marquise Brown and N'Keal Harry. Yikes. And then you look at like round 2 and round 3. I mean, a ton of studs came out of that class. It ended up being like A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. I don't know that these guys are going to end up becoming that good, like legit alpha receivers, but it is where the meat of the class was on day 2 and day 3. Again, it just takes receivers. So funny, Charles, because like when you get to the league, you're going to be put into you got to be put in the right role. Like Metcalf was the guy who needed to sort of be groomed as a route runner. Like he could run a slant, he could run a post, and he could run a go, and he could be awesome on those routes. But then we've seen him develop into like a legit number 1 receiver. A.J. Brown was another guy who played like a big slot receiver role in college, but then he got moved to that X receiver position because he showed he could run real legit big boy routes in college, and he's obviously blossomed into one of the best top 5 receiver type in the league. So it's a lot of these guys that could end up just growing and developing once they get to their pro team, but like sitting here right now, it's kind of hard to consider them great prospects, but that doesn't mean that they won't outkick expectations, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't think there are a lot of guys this year that I would draft, let's say top 10 or top 15, but there's a lot of guys on like day 2. But if I'm a team that has like a dominant number 1 but is looking for like a long-term number 2, I think this is a class that you would probably love. You know, if I'm Seattle and I'm looking at, all right, we got DK, we got Tyler Lockett for a couple more years probably. This might be the time to like dip into this receiver class and really kind of fill out that room. I think that those are the teams that would really enjoy this class. I think teams that are looking for, you know, we need a top end receiving talent that can go out and win balls on the outside and play X, like we talked about before. Not sure that guy is like currently in this class. Maybe there's some guys that can develop into that, but I do like this class just for the prospect of just like adding talent that can kind of fill out an offense more so than one that puts it over the top.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, I just think we've been spoiled the last few years. Like these wide receiver prospects were just so good. It was so obvious they were ready to contribute right away. I agree with you about guys who, like teams who need a complimentary pass catcher. They're going to love this class. I keep thinking of Buffalo at the end of the first round. Like there's a ton of dudes that like they don't need a number 1. They have Stephon Diggs, but they desperately need a legitimate number 2 who can separate across the full route tree, which Gabe Davis is just not that guy. They could also use a legit slot. I think there's plenty of options for them there. You know, just to put a bow on this, for me, I just put this up on my website, like a stacked receiver board from the 21 to 23 classes. I only have one guy ranked inside the top 10 and that is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. But then I've got a decent bit of guys that are ranked 12 to 30. Like then there's a ton. So I think that kind of puts a picture as to how we view this class. Last thing before we get into specific prospects, if you're listening to this podcast, you're about to hear us talk about a ton of tiny fellas who could go in like rounds 1 and 2. What do you think about that? Like, is that a trend? And do we need to sort of change our threshold expectations for the position going forward, which it doesn't seem to be as big of a deal. Like, we've got some dramatic guys here that are very small, but it doesn't seem to be as big of a deal as it used to be if you don't fit that prototypical, 6 foot plus 200 type pounds or whatever.
Well, I think it matters in the sense like, for me at least, that's part of the reason why this receiver class is getting knocked, because some of these guys are so small. And then we'll get into, I think someone like Jalin Hyatt is really interesting because there are aspects of his game that like fit the NFL level. But we talked about it with Hendon Hooker last week. There's going to be a major swing, but or a major adjustment for him as he gets into the NFL. But, I started thinking about this receiver class. Like Quentin Johnston is probably one of the bigger guys. You got Cedric Tillman, who's a big guy. But then, you're looking at Jordan Addison, who is like the size of some high school receivers. Zay Flowers, who's a small guy. Josh Downs, Jalin Hyatt. Yeah. And it's not even to say like these are bad players, but it all ties into the theme. Like if someone's going to ask me, what's one of the reasons why you don't think this class has a lot of number 1 receivers? And I just point at some of the heights and weights that are listed here. There's not guys who are the size of really, DK Metcalf or an AJ Brown or, Julio Jones when we're start talking about the profile of what you think about when you hear, a dominant top flight number 1 receiver. But I think if some of these teams are creative where they get drafted. A lot of these guys are going to have productive careers. It's just like, whoa, this is a really, really tiny group of receivers in terms of like height and weight too.
Yeah, people talk about building your receiver core like a basketball team, where you have different sizes of guys, and like this class could have a lot of point guards. Like you feed these guys a lot of targets in the short area and stuff like that. It's always dangerous when I get into my cross sport analogies, but I think that one does make a little bit of sense. But yeah, this class definitely interesting with the size part of it, and I'm usually very anti wide receiver sizeism, but you've got to show me that you can play above that size. You got to show me that you can do more than you'd expect from just a smaller frame player, which some of these guys do, some of these guys don't. So let's just get right into it. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I think, is at the top of this class, and I think he's at a tier of his own. That's not like complete consensus. There are some people that, like Daniel Jeremiah, still has Jordan Addison ranked as the top receiver. I know Lance Zierlein has Jalin Hyatt as the top receiver. There's varying opinions, but for the most part, JSN does seem to be in a tier of his own. 6'1", 196 pounds. Charles feels like such a clean evaluation to me.
I can't think of anyone who's helped themselves more this offseason as far as draft prospects. It's like Anthony Richardson and JSN.
Yeah.
Because the fear with JSN, which, I never quite fully bought, just given like what I expected his role to be, was like the long-term speed, but if he's a slot prospect, then I don't really know how important that can turn out to be. But, he comes out pro day and by all accounts runs in between like a 4.48 and like a 4.52 or 4.55, which is good enough. The 10 split was good enough, but I think where he really won was the agility drills. Like both three cone and the short shuttle were top of the line. And then you go back to like the last full season that he played at Ohio State. In that last game in the Rose Bowl, he had over 300 yards. And I know, anytime you have an outlier performance like that, it's just like, whoa, okay, that's a bit much. But still, like, I think when you watch his game, like he's clean, he's really productive, and he's just one of those guys. It's just like, man, he's just a really, really good football player. To me, I think he's probably like the best route runner, at least like in the short area field in this draft class to me. And I understand why people might knock him, because you're just like, oh, he's a slot type receiver only. But that kind of gets us into, well, what do you need if you're a team like looking for this draft, looking at this draft class? And we've seen a lot of slot receivers over, let's call it the past 20 years of football, that have racked up 130, 140, 150 targets. That's someone that's going to be really important to your team if they're commanding like that much of an attention from like your own quarterback and your own coaching staff. And I think that he's a guy that can really like slide in day one and kind of pop off pretty immediately. I always wonder, those guys who basically took off their last year, like what's the adjustment period? But, we saw in that draft class that had Michael Parsons, Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, Rashawn Slater, that like the first draft that came out of the COVID year, you can still make it happen even if you didn't play much that last season. So I think that has probably eased some concerns.
I mean, I went on like a mini rant about this when we had Eric Edholm on the podcast like over a month ago at this point, but like Jaxon Smith-Njigba, we're really going to knock him for being just a slot player when Cooper Kupp led the NFL in yards, catches, and touchdowns like 2 seasons ago, and he's a slot only player. I do think JSN shows you a little bit of traits, especially like you said, as a route runner in the intermediate area. Like he's so good on those dig routes against man coverage too, even if it's slot man coverage, like still pretty tight physical man coverage, dig routes, out routes, stuff like that. It's a little similar to like Justin Jefferson when he was playing the slot at LSU, where you watch him and like, you know what? I don't know that he's going to be Justin Jefferson, but it's like you watch him and there was more reps of Justin Jefferson playing outside than there are JSN, but like earlier in his career, you still see a guy that I think could translate to the flanker position at the very least. Like if you're going to go 2 receiver sets, like I don't think you're dealing with even like the Amon-Ra St. Brown comps, and I love St. Brown as a player, I don't even think those make a lot of sense, because like I think you could line JSN up against like a press man corner and you could rely on him in certain situations. I love player comps. I've come like full around on player comps, especially when it comes to receiver position, because I just have so much data on these guys to compare to. And to me, I think he just fits so cleanly into like a Keenan Allen comparison. And Keenan Allen is a guy that has played the slot a ton, but you can trust him to get open against press man coverage. I think that's JSN is that type of guy.
Yeah, and that kind of works. It's not like Keenan was ever the fastest guy, but
yeah,
you do have the ability to get open. And like I said, and like you said, being a slot receiver, especially nowadays when, everyone's running 11 personnel like 100% of the time, and you have 3 receivers on the field. Yeah, if that guy's going to end up playing like 75%, 80% of snaps for some of these teams, then it ends up being a pretty valuable pick. So, and look, I don't like to slide too much into like anecdotal stuff around draft season because I think there's just a lot of truth in what you're watching and what you're seeing from the tape and what you're seeing like from the athletic testing. But man, you talk to people at Ohio State and you talk to receivers that have come out, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. I talked to someone I really trust at Ohio State. They all say JSN was that dude, like better than all of them. I personally I don't know. I was a big fan of Chris Olave last year. So we'll see how that gets into the NFL or how it goes going to the NFL. But I don't think it means absolutely nothing that everyone that was closely with him at Ohio State says, yeah, this guy was the best outside of Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I talked to both Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson when we were together at the Super Bowl, and both of those guys, like you can see the interviews are on the Yahoo Sports YouTube page, and like they both say like, hey, he's better than us. And again, I disagree. I think that Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were better prospects, but I think it has to mean something. Not just like they want to get their boy drafted high, they want to hype up their guy, but I do think, man, he's a really interesting player. And I think what Garrett Wilson said to me in the interview was, he used the phrase like he'll do the laundry for you. Like he's a dirty work type of player. And I think there's a lot of teams that are really going to love him. If I'm the Packers and he's on the board at the, whatever they're like 16th pick or wherever 15. They're at 15, 16, I'm turning in the card for him because I think they could still use another receiver there. But all right, let's move on to some other popularly mocked first rounders. I've got 4 guys in this group, starting with Quentin Johnston, who we've already mentioned by name. 6'3", 208. He stands out in this class because he looks like the wide receiver 1 prototype. But Charles, I kind of go, I'm a little like on both sides here with Quentin Johnston because as much as I said like he looks like the wide receiver 1 prototype, he might play smaller than like everybody else we're about to discuss.
Yeah, he's real intriguing because like you said, you don't really see a lot of big receivers struggle like the big part of the game. But man, when he gets the ball in his hands and has some room to like make something happen, I think he's just electric. I was kind of surprised that his speed times were so bad. Like I think he ran like a 4.58 and the agility times weren't great. Because I interviewed him for the Yahoo Sports YouTube channel too about a month ago. And he was saying a lot of things that I agree with in terms of when he gets the ball in his hand, he feels like he's playing running back again because that's what he played in high school. And then he got moved out in college. I'm assuming because there aren't a whole lot of 6'3" running backs.
6'3" running backs, unless you're going to be like Derrick Henry and you have to put on 50 pounds or something at that frame. But yeah, I remember watching the interview and it definitely showed. I didn't know he played running back, but he runs after the catch like a running back, almost sometimes to a fault where like he looks like he seeks out contact sometimes. But that does stand out.
Yeah, and it's just to me like what makes him interesting is just like it's kind of rare to see ball carrying ability in a guy that's that big. And maybe the athletic testing probably will hurt him a little bit. But again, it's one of these guys where maybe he's not a number 1, but man, a lot of teams can use a 6'3" guy that can kind of run after the catch and make things happen, especially when you start talking about like how quickly some of these passing games are moving in the NFL. You're just trying to get your playmakers in space. I think with a creative offensive coordinator, he's a guy that can have a lot of success year 1. But, it's not the cleanest game. Like you said, it's also weird seeing a 6'3" guy that's not super great at the contested catch game. But I think his profile is interesting enough where he still makes sense as like a top 40 pick.
I totally agree. I think he's like a late 1, early second round type of guy. I struggle. I'm interested in what you think about this. I struggled in terms of who do I like as prospects? Who did I like more, Treylon Burks last year or Quentin Johnston? Because I was lower than consensus on Treylon Burks. I liked all those guys that went ahead of him more. But because I thought there were serious questions about Treylon Burks' ability to translate. Like, he was basically a project as a pure X receiver, despite that prototype, because he played in like the weirdest role of all time for a receiver that size in college. Quentin Johnston at least plays those. He has a lot of experience playing as an X receiver, seeing like physical coverage on the outside, especially like in the playoffs against Michigan and Georgia. I know he put up like one catch against your Bulldogs, but I think that had a lot more to do with his quarterback. Yeah, with Georgia and his quarterback, than more so than Quentin Johnston, because you do see him get open against man coverage a good bit. It's just like on a small handful of routes. I'm not in like a DK Metcalf type of way. Just again, slants, posts, go routes, sometimes on the hitch, although I think he mistimed some of those deeper stop routes at times. But I wouldn't call him like a completely raw route runner. I think he needs some seasoning, some tightening up there. But either way, I think he's kind of, my player comparison for him is Christian Watson from last year. Again, I
was just thinking that.
Yeah, right. Like, and because like if you go back and watch Christian Watson, even as a rookie, like when he started to figure it out, he's not doing a lot of nuanced stuff. It's like crossing routes. It's get him in the open field. I think I've always said with Christian Watson, he was freakier in the open field than he was down in the contested catch game, because he had some of the same problems that Johnston does about like extending his hands and playing through contact and getting bothered by guys who are smaller than him. Like if Quentin Johnston learns to just extend his hands, like if he gets a coach that'll ride his ass and like really get him to work hard at this, I think he could be a great player. Even if he never tightens that stuff up, he's so freaky that I think he could fall into a Christian Watson type of role, who I compared to Martavis Bryant last year. So a lot of that same axis of players where they might just win on like slants, posts, and goes, deep over, stuff like that. But when you get them in the open field, they can really make stuff happen.
Yeah, I was thinking of Christian Watson's rookie year, because I think we see this a lot. And, I think of the player that first made me think of like this archetype going back and watching. It's like Josh Gordon when he was balling with the Browns back in the day. When you have a receiver that big that can move in the open field with the ball in his hands, it's until they get everything else right, where you're learning a little bit some of the more intricate things about route running. It's like you said, screens, slants, digs, overs, goes. Like, just run across the field and we'll try to get you the ball. Run down the field and we'll try to get you the ball. And then after that, it's all on you. It's all on what God blessed you with. But we'll try to get you there in the first place. So, I think Quentin Johnston, like I was thinking Martavis Bryant until he ran that 40, and I was like, maybe not. But like even the Christian Watson stuff, like he was a lot more athletic, at least on the combine, than Johnston was. But I think when you're talking about how they can succeed early, it's about the same thing. So I can't really think of a comparison.
Well, you mentioned Josh Gordon. Like you mentioned Josh Gordon. He wasn't. I'm just looking at his mock draftable page. He was like a 44th percentile 40-yard dash guy, 57th percentile vertical jump. Like, and Johnston shined in the vertical jump, 50th percentile broad jump. Like, and just by the way, another guy that pops up as a comparable for Josh Gordon, although this guy ripped it up in the 40-yard dash, is the late Demaryius Thomas. Like, I think he was definitely faster for that size. And by the way, these guys also have like 20 pounds on Johnston too. They're like in the 220 zone. Right. But those guys, that sort of same-ish archetype of. I don't think Demaryius Thomas, especially earlier in his career, even when he was working with Peyton Manning, was never like a great route runner.
Oh, no. Yeah, he was like the poster boy for slants and screens. Like, we're going to throw you this slant. You're going to run 80 yards for a touchdown, DT. I think that's where Quentin Johnston can have some success. Because I don't know. You also get to this point with the draft season where like bias comes in, because I saw Quentin Johnston run basically a 4.6 40. And I was like, I know he's faster than that. I know he's a little bit faster than that. He moves a little bit faster than that. So we'll see how that materializes itself in the NFL level. But I think that his size and just the ability to make things happen in spaces, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to make plays as a rookie.
All right. Speaking of some surprising results in the offseason process, Jordan Addison, the Bilenikoff winner in his last year with Pitt, he transfers to USC. Isn't quite as productive with Caleb Williams, but he has his moments for sure. But he weighed in at 173 pounds at 5'11" and ran like a 4.4 40, which, size, speed wise, that combination is not great. Again, he's a guy that Daniel Jeremiah had as like the 9th prospect in this class at one point. I've been meaning to catch up with DJ about like, hey, like, explain that to me like I'm 5. But I haven't managed to do it yet. I don't know. What do you think about Jordan Addison?
The last time I was 173 pounds was 9th grade. So
I was a fat kid, and that's well documented on the internet. So for me, I might have been like 173 pounds in like 6th grade, bro. But that's I also never quite managed to make the receiver position in any time playing football. That's for sure. So yeah.
But like I do like his tape a lot. To me, Jordan Addison's like the quintessential number 2 receiver.
Yeah.
Definitely not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a guy that, ends up taking like, I'm trying to think of guys who are even that small that take on a huge workload in the NFL. It's like, Antonio Brown?
Dude, even AB was like 185, and
right,
yeah, Tyreek Hill
yeah.
is still like in the 180s.
But Tyreek is rocked. Yeah, he's rocked up, man.
Yeah.
I think for Jordan Addison, like, you also have to be realistic about like what the combine means. Like, it's these guys coming in, bulking up, trying to get into shape to impress all these guys that are hopefully going to be giving them a ton of money in the coming months. If your combine weight is 173, I have to assume you're playing in like the 160s or maybe even the high 150s.
Yeah.
Just because, when you're moving around during the season, you just naturally drop weight. If you're working out that much, it's kind of hard to keep the weight on. I think that really limits like what his role can be in the NFL, because you just don't see a lot of receivers that are playing that small. But like I said, his game to me is just quintessential number 2 receivers. It's clean. He's was a really productive receiver. I don't really see a whole lot of like bad things I don't like about his game. It's just size is a big outlier, and I think that's going to end up dropping him on draft day.
And the size, I think, shows up on tape too. Like when you watch him try to win against press coverage on go routes, 9 routes, any sort of vertical stuff, he gets bullied around a little bit. But you can work around that as a pro. Again, if he hypothetically go back to that Buffalo example, you've got Gabe Davis as like your X receiver. You've got, even Diggs playing X receiver sometimes because he's such a good route runner and can beat press coverage, and you've got Jordan Addison as like a free release guy, that you move into the slot or you have as a flanker. You can work around that stuff. And he's an awesome route runner on like in breaking stuff. I mean, slants, curls, digs, even like deeper post routes. If he has that free release, he's working off-man coverage, zone coverage. He can really, really get over on players. So I think he could be a high-quality number 2 receiver, not even just like a meh number 2 receiver, but like a high-quality 2. If you just throw out like the Bilenikoff Award winner and his kind of resume, especially the Pitt days, like he does feel like a pretty easy evaluation and sort of similar to like Jahan Dotson last year. I like Dotson a little bit more because he was like a freak in the contested catch game despite the size, but he's like 5'11" and weighed in at like a fake 180 or I think in the NFL or something like that. But I think he weighed in at times as like 178 at Pitt, at Penn State. So he feels very similar to Dotson last year. And Dotson, people thought he was like overdrafted at the 16th pick by Washington, but I loved his game and I was totally comfortable with that. I think if somebody views Jordan Addison as a late 1 pick, I would sign off on that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I really like the Bills setup that you portray, because I think Jordan Addison, he's kind of a guy that I think he needs a big arm quarterback in the NFL, just because he's someone that can like take a lot of advantage of things before the ball is thrown in terms of getting open, finding soft spots in the zone. But I don't think that he's going to end up being like a great yak guy in the NFL just because of his size. So, if I'm a team that that is thinking about drafting him, I would like to have a big arm quarterback that can he's going to get open, just pin it right on him, and we'll take the yards right there as they come. And anything that comes after that is kind of a bonus. Where I would struggle or worry about him is like if you're getting into a situation where, you have a quarterback who's a little bit late on the ball and you're going to be creating contested catch situations. That's where I would get a little bit worried. And it's another reason why, he's not going to be the number one receiver. He's going to need to have a running mate or two, depending on the caliber of those guys that can kind of take the pressure off of him. But I do like his game for what he offers. It's just not number one receiver stuff.
Because you brought up the big arm quarterback thing, like he would make sense with the Chargers. And I saw Hayden Winks pointed out that Jordan Addison Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy pointed out that Jordan Addison initially committed to Maryland to go with a certain wide receiver coach, and then that wide receiver coach went to Pitt, so Jordan Addison went to Pitt, and that wide receiver coach, I think, is employed by the Chargers now, if I remember what Winks was saying. So there might be a connection there, and that's, again, big arm quarterback. They have an X receiver in Mike Williams, but they need somebody to get separation, and they still have Keenan Allen, but, like, please, no more Josh Palmer. Like,
Yeah. And even Keenan Allen, that's got like a year or two left probably before
they kick that salary can down the road. So we'll see. I
know. I love Keenan Allen's game, but there was some stuff watching him last year. I was like, woof.
Well, I mean, his hamstring is like hanging off the bone, So. A smaller guy who plays, I think, bigger than his size, Zay Flowers next, 5'9", 182 pounds. Zay Flowers, I really like him. I think he's my number 2 receiver in this class. Again, smaller guy. He's someone that we know bulked up for the combine. Like there was he put out pictures of it where he was like 170 something and then 182 when he went to the combine, and he's all smiling because he added that weight. So good for you, Zay. But good route runner, and the good thing about Zay Flowers, you see him at Boston College play all 3 receiver positions. Like some of these guys you've only seen play in the slot, stuff like that. You see reps of Zay Flowers playing X. You see him playing flanker. You see him playing as that slot receiver. And my God, dude, I don't want to be mean to the quarterbacks at Boston College, but I don't know who dislikes those guys more, me or Zay Flowers. Because like you watch Flowers get wide ass open, and the quarterback taking checkdowns, not even seeing him, and you see him throw his hands up all the time, getting pissed at the. I mean. He plays with a lot of fire, and he's a really good route runner, and he's explosive, which I think draws people to the Antonio Brown comparison. I think that's like a 30-day minimum jail sentence if you compare people to AB, because he was that good. He was that good in his prime.
He was that good, yeah.
He was that good, but I do think to give him like my player comp, like the Diet Coke version of Antonio Brown, which is the other Steelers receiver, Deontay Johnson, who great route runner. I love Deontay's game, but he's a mistake-prone player, and so is Zay Flowers a little bit too. But I really like Zay Flowers. I think he could end up getting drafted. I'm kind of nervous he's going to get drafted 14th by the Patriots because they seem to like be screaming that they like him so much, but I could see him going pretty high.
Wow. Deontay Johnson. Okay, first of all, I love Zay Flowers. I absolutely love his game. And Deontay Johnson is another player I will never quit as well.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. Me too, man. I mean, that guy is so good as a route runner, but he just is, I mean, the drop's not even that. It's the after catch stuff. He's got to be like number 1 on the boneheaded play scale in terms of, going backwards after the catch and stuff like that. But I love Johnson.
Yeah. But you mentioned the explosiveness with Zay, and that's what kind of gets me coming back every time. His 10-yard split at the combine was 1.49 seconds, which is blazing fast. So basically, like right out the gate when the ball snapped, he is going to be one of the fastest players in the field. And I think it shows up on the tape. Like I think one thing that I like to do is I've started to do, draft stuff a little bit later in my career is I like to wait for the combine to happen first for a lot of these guys. Mm-hmm. And then I'll go back. That combine, it shows up on Zay's tape.
Totally.
And like you said, all around the field, he played every spot for them, and he produced just about everywhere they put him. I'm pretty sure the Pro Football Focus draft guide, they had him as one of the most productive deep receivers in the league, in college football, which is amazing when you talk about the quarterback play that he went through. Because I remember before the season, Phil Jerkovich, the quarterback that played for part of the season this past year at Boston College, he was, one of these guys, hey, if things go right, maybe he could be an NFL draft prospect. No. Didn't quite happen for him. But I think through all that, when you see Zay, someone like Zay Flowers continue to produce like that, it's an encouraging sign for what they can do in the NFL. And I think that Zay is one of the guys that I feel good about taking in the first round this year, along with Jaxon Smith-Njigba and then Quentin Johnston, depending on the team. I think that the explosiveness makes him a little bit more scheme-proof. It's just like you said, the boneheaded plays gotta stop. Yeah. But I will never quit someone who's like that good before the catch happens.
Me too. Me too, 100%. That's like that. Yeah, that is my thing for sure. Especially Deontay. That's why I love that comp for him. But yeah, man, I could see Zay Flowers. If there's a receiver that's going to become a number one guy despite the size, I could see it being Zay Flowers. Again, it's sacrilegious to make the Antonio Brown comparison, but Antonio Brown became not just a number one receiver, became like a Hall of Fame level player before he went off the reservation. But he was able to be that number one guy because he was so explosive, but just such an incredible route runner. I mean, so detailed, especially in the vertical game. And there are flashes of that with Zay. So I'm glad we're on the same page with that. I think we might be on the same page with this next guy here, Jalin Hyatt, who, if you listened to the quarterback episode or you saw the videos on social and, Tennessee fans, as you predicted, getting super upset about it. Jalin Hyatt comes from that Looney Tunes offense that we talked about with Hendon Hooker last episode. 6 foot, 176 pounds. I mean, dude, there is just so much Jalin Hyatt tape that it's like, I don't know what to do with this. It's so hard to apply it to Sundays, as great as it is on Saturdays. And I mean, he had like 5 touchdowns against Alabama. He was super productive this year. It's just fake news production, so much of it. So I don't think that Jalin Hyatt's like a terrible prospect or anything, but I wouldn't take him in round 1 with all of these questions.
No. I've seen some Will Fuller comparisons I don't like.
Yeah, I get it.
It's not the same. It's not the same. And the problem with like the Tennessee offense, like we talked about last week, is when you're looking at draft stuff, it's about like translatable plays and stuff where you can squint and say, okay, that's something that you see on Saturday that he's going to have to do on Sunday. There's just not much, if any, of that in the Tennessee tape. And look, I will say this: any team that can go and give Nick Saban fits on defense like that, you've obviously figured something out that's working for you. But man, like when you watch it, it's like you're stacked up like 100 miles away from the quarterback who is sitting on the complete other hash of the field. And then when if you're just looking at it from a defensive perspective, like the hash marks in college are wider. So, depending on where the ball's placed, like you have more space just to do whatever you want in terms of mainly like in terms of overloading one side of the field with just a whole bunch of space that's not really available to you in the NFL. So like what Tennessee will do is, let's say they're lined up on the right hash. The ball's being snapped on the right hash. They'll have a stack all the way out like near the left sideline.
Guy might as well be getting Gatorade at that point. He's so close to the damn sideline.
And then from a defensive point of view, you're like, well, how the hell am I supposed to cover all this space? Even a slant route becomes dangerous because he's going to have 20 yards to run in front of him. And like quite literally, these are just formations that don't exist in the NFL because the hash marks are closer, which means you're kind of dealing with, something closer to 50-50 fields on each side of the hash marks, even though it's not that. You see these clips of him at when they're playing Alabama, especially, where they're stacked up, and then he just runs basically untouched down the field for a wide open touchdown, splits the safeties. Like that's just never going to happen in the NFL. But you at least have to like think about the big playability, right? And I thought he was going to run a little bit faster than a 4.4 at the combine, but I think there has to be something said about his ability just to get open deep and make big plays, even if a lot of it is manufactured stuff.
Yeah, and we're talking about how tough it is to defend the pass game part of it, but there's the running game element of it too, because you can't. You're not stacking the box like with that much space out there to worry about in the passing game. So you can, and the quarterback run part of it too, because Hendon Hooker could run a little bit. I think the the Will Fuller stuff, because I've made that comparison from like the way Will Fuller was productive in the NFL with the Texans, because when he was really firing off as like just a outrageous deep threat, he had the 1 year where he was actually a number one receiver, but then immediately gets popped for PEDs. I'm like, there might be a little bit of a coincidence there. But when he was really firing off was like they had DeAndre Hopkins as the X receiver, and like he's the coverage dictator. You have to worry about him. Deshaun Watson's the quarterback. He's mobile. The Texans also like to run the ball a good bit. And it is just Will Fuller would get single coverage on the other side of the field and could just rip him up. I think that makes sense from like a production standpoint, but I also have seen Josh Norris was on the show, and if talking to him, he compares him to like Ted Ginn, which I know that you hear Ted Ginn, it's like, oh, disgusting. But Ted Ginn did have like 700 yards a few seasons. He had a long career simply because of his speed. And I do think Jalin Hyatt tracks the ball and catches the ball better than Ted Ginn does. So the vertical ability is real. It's just the amount of translatable plays, as you said, is really hard to figure out.
Yeah, you're going to have to work with him. I think just on like NFL defensive backs are going to be so much more combative than what he faced in college, just because like there's going to be more opportunities to get hands on him. And that's going to be a big adjustment period for him. But like if you can get him as a rookie where he's starting off as like your wide receiver 3, I think that's probably fine for him as someone who can still be a source of big plays.
Yeah, in a weird way, I kind of feel like he has a pretty safe floor as a player because he can be like a speed receiver 3. And again, like Ted Ginn, play for 10 plus years just doing that. He just might not have, like, he's going to have to get better as a route runner because like he'll just run into guys when he doesn't have those free releases. He does not have a good timing and rhythm as a route runner. And if he does develop that at 176 pounds, great. But I don't know. We'll see. Let's go a little faster on these day 2 to 3 guys, because I've joked about this being a 3-hour podcast. It's not going to be a 3-hour podcast. Day 2 to 3 guys that stick out to me, and we actually have some big receivers here, so get ready for that. But not this first guy. Josh Downs, UNC, 5'9", 171 pounds. I love this guy's game, though. I really love Josh Downs. Great route runner, I think. I think he beats man coverage. He can destroy man coverage. You see him play on the outside a little bit at UNC, but what really gets me about Downs is not just how great he is as a route runner against man and zone coverage. This guy, I think, is the second best contested catch receiver in the class, and he's like 5'9", 171. You consistently see him win tight coverage 50-50 balls at that size. Maybe it doesn't happen in the NFL, but you have very verifiable evidence to watch it in college. Talk about a guy that I've never been able to quit, Charles. Sterling Shepard. I think Josh Downs reminds me so much of Sterling Shepard. Again, that's not going to get the people super excited, but I maintain that Sterling Shepard would have been a great player had he never run into all those injuries.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Giants, they love Sterling. Just like as a human being. That's why he keeps getting money from them. So, whenever he's healthy, it's like 10 plus targets, lock it in. But he's for the 3 weeks that he's healthy. Which I guess is kind of the fear of what happens with Josh Downs too, right? 5'9", 171. Like his game is fun. It's just, you look at Quentin Johnston and it's easier for me to see like where a big body receiver with the small receivers game translates a little bit better than like a small body receiver with a big receivers game. But anytime you're talking about someone who can run routes like Josh Downs does, they're going to be useful for an offense, but he's smaller than Jordan Addison, who we just slammed for his size. So I get a little concerned about that.
At least he's more like compact. He's got a bit of the same frame as like Marquise Brown, who was 5'9", and he weighed 166 pounds at his combine because he was recovering from injury. But that was because he was coming back from an injury, all that stuff. But yeah, and he also, Josh Downs probably doesn't have Marquise Brown's speed. But yeah, I rate him really highly. I think he's a top 5 receiver in the class just because I'm very confident he translates to some sort of slot receiver role. But he might be maxed out at that. Next guy up here, I've got Cedric Tillman, also played in the Looney Tunes offense, but 6'3", 213. You see some real actual NFL reps with Cedric Tillman. And there's some people that are very, very high on Cedric Tillman.
I know a handful of people in media and in the league that like Tillman better than Hyatt as far as like Tennessee receivers go.
I'm
it's a tough
one of them.
Yeah, I think if you're just looking at the stats, it's a tough sell, right? But I think when you started looking at like, all right, well, is what is possible for these guys moving forward in the NFL? I think Tillman has like it's in some ways it's an easier projection than where Hyatt's at, right? The size, I think it's a little bit more translatable. And, there's some instances where they got to use Tillman as like a shield for Hyatt. And I think
that's a great way. That is a great way of saying it.
If they're going to, if you're going to use him as a bodyguard, I think you got to look at the bodyguard a little bit, because that's more of like the NFL style bodies and athletes that you're going to be going up against. So look, Tillman, I think he's got like some real upside as an ex-receiver, but it's going to take him a while to get there, which I don't think is really like a slight on him. It's just more like you need the reps coming from that Tennessee offense.
Yeah, he is probably the best ex-receiver in the class, and probably just because Quentin Johnston's like, I don't know what he's going to end up being, but from like a clean projection standpoint, he looks and plays like an ex-receiver. He's probably the best ball winner in the class. And from a comparison standpoint, his reception perception metrics in 2021 at Tennessee, from like his best routes, his man coverage, zone coverage success rate, they're very similar to like Cortland Sutton's 2019 season in the NFL. Obviously, there's difference in levels of competition there, and difference of usage. But I think that's a good player comparison for Cedric Tillman. I'm curious what you think of this next guy, Marvin Mims, 5'11", 183. He's got like some fanboys on Twitter. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, there was like, in terms of Dynasty fantasy Twitter, I had spent like a whole day talking about Marvin Mims. I'm curious what you think about him. He's like kind of a vertical receiver, I think, with some possible upside there.
Yeah, I mainly think this is one of the first years that I can imagine, or that I can imagine, that I can remember, where watching Oklahoma's offense was not fun.
Nope, not fun.
That was my first thought. They had some quarterback issues, but I think like he's one of those guys where you kind of have to, when you watch the film, you kind of have to isolate, like for him especially, I think, like him and Zay Flowers, you kind of have to isolate what's going on with him versus what's going on with the rest of the offense. I mean, Oklahoma, they had the game against Texas where they got blanked, like something like 55-0 or something like that, which is not what we were used to seeing under Lincoln Riley and what he was able to do at Oklahoma before moving to USC. But I'm not like crazy high on him. I do think he's a guy that has a chance to make like a nice impact in the NFL in ways that he wasn't able to in college, because the talent will be a little bit better around him. He's got real upside as like a deep threat. I think some of the speed stuff is real. But even then, and we're talking about like day 2 and day 3 guys, so obviously, he's someone that's going to have to fit as like a complementary role, because he doesn't really have the size. And I think when you're looking at just how this season went for Oklahoma in the offense, just needs some time to get adjusted to playing with good players again. But I do like him as a prospect for someone that can add speed and big playability to a receiver room.
Yeah, I like him a little bit too. I think he shows you, and I mean, isolating players from their surroundings, that's like the whole goal of reception perception. So I think he shows you a lot, even in that 2022 film. But the 2021 stuff, like, I still think the best play I've seen while charting all these receivers is Caleb Williams' touchdown to Marvin Mims against Texas in 21.
God.
Stupid throw, even stupider catch, perhaps, on Mims's part. Just incredible stuff. And I think Mims shows you that upside to, like, I remember talking to Sigmund Bloom and the late, great Chris Wessling about, like, John Brown early in his career, how he was, like, one of those show dogs, in the Frisbee competitions. Like, you throw that Frisbee down the field and he like runs under it and grabs it. There's a little bit of that with Mims. I think he's kind of on that John Brown, T.Y. Hilton axis of, like, they were, and I mean, I'm biased as the biggest John Brown fan ever, but, like, I think those guys were both, like, fringy number ones, really good number twos. And I think Mims has that upside, but really just more of like a deployment perspective. If he is your 3 and you're using him as a speed slot, 'cause he plays a lot in the slot at Oklahoma, I think he could end up giving you some pretty good years. Jonathan Mingo, like this guy a lot too. Again, these are the receivers I kind of like on day 2. 6'2", 220. He's had a weird career with lack of production and injuries, but he reminds me so much of, in 2021, writing up Amon-Ra St. Brown's reception perception profile from USC, and he was like a 70% outside player, and I just kept writing in his profile, this is a big slot receiver, this is a power slot receiver. And I feel the same way about Jonathan Mingo, as a guy that I know some people compare him to AJ Brown because I think the uniform and the size and some of the downfield stuff, but I feel like if Jonathan Mingo, who they used in like almost a pseudo tight end role sometimes, I think he could end up being a really productive like power slot player in the league.
I'm gonna take your word for it because I haven't seen him.
All right. Well, there we go.
All right. So, looking at the sheet, 2 of the last 3 players on this list I haven't seen, but I can give you takes on the next one.
Okay. Perfect. Well, yeah, Jonathan Mingo, you can take my word for it. Bully ball guy who makes guys miss in the open field and can make plays downfield. I really like. I love him as sort of that. And, when I say like the power slot thing, by the way, number one, I'm cribbing those notes from Nate Tice from the Athletic Football Show, but it's just basically a way of saying like a big slot receiver, like guys who are going to help you in the blocking game, especially, which I think Mingo is the best blocking receiver in this draft class. Again, I say it every show. Nobody's enjoyed my wide receiver blocking breakdowns this offseason, but I'm telling you, it matters. And for like a guy who might go to a Shanahan style system or something like that, where they want to run that stuff, he would be great there. Alan Lazard, again, has made a lot of plays like that as that power slot player for the Green Bay Packers.
I say this coming from someone who watched a lot of Falcons football, obviously. He sounds like you just described like Mohamed Sanu during the Shanahan years. Power slot, gonna block, need another guy out there to kind of freeze things up for him.
100%. I think that St. Brown has been like the peak player of that archetype, who has become super productive, and he's real. But again, some of the routes that they shine on, in breaking stuff, shorter routes, like not really going to separate down the field. Pretty similar players. But yeah, Mohamed Sanu, totally. That's a good role comparison for that.
And even just the size too, like 6'2", 220, big slot. Look, I haven't seen Mingo, but if you're going to tell me that maybe he could be like that player, dude, that's a really valuable player to have. Especially like when we talked about building building a wide receiver room like a basketball team. Just remember like 2016 Falcons. You look back and they had Julio, who's just your LeBron pretty much. Then you had Mohamed Sanu and Taylor Gabriel and Aldrick Robinson. Like you have like a group of guys that can kind of do a little bit of everything. So, these receiver rooms, I think, especially as NFL teams start to, more 11 personnel where you're just having 3 receivers on the field, like even some of these later round guys are going to end up being valuable and having big roles in the NFL, just because it really is like a pass-centric league now. The more that we move on and the more that offenses evolve and take stuff from the college game.
Yeah, that MVP Matt Ryan Falcons team is a good example of a team that it built like a basketball team. I think Mingo's going to have more fans in the NFL than he does on like Dynasty Fantasy Twitter and stuff like that. He's just a ball player, man. I really think I come back to that with him. Is A.T. Perry the other guy that you've seen on my list here?
Yeah, he's someone I kind of had to be talking to his game, but I will say this is a little snippet. He did make the All Juice team as one of our wide receiver prospects. And
so
I kind of feel
does that mean like Charles Robinson and calling around to teams that talked you into it, like the teams like him or something?
No, that was my own work, because my biggest grief with him was not really anything that had to do with him. I hate watching Wake Forest's offense. It is disgusting.
Not fun.
It's anti-football. It's not good stuff. the play they do that irks me the most is when they'll do like the slow handoff, like option stuff, like where the quarterback and the running back, they're like almost holding hands after the ball snap and walking up to the line of scrimmage and then deciding to deal with it from there.
Get that out of here.
Not only is it like not anything you won't see in the NFL, it's not something that you really even see like in other parts of college football. I don't know if it's like surely like one of one because there's so many teams and it's impossible to break down everything. But in terms of what I watched, like that offense is one of one in a way that's not translatable even compared to like Tennessee's offense. But man, it's hard to find guys that are 6'3", 200 and can run. And what I love about A.T. Perry's game is it's the ball tracking like down the field.
Yeah.
Like he's made so many ridiculous catches for the quarterback Sam Hartman, who was an NFL prospect at some point, but I don't think he is anymore. I love A.T. Perry as like an upside X receiver prospect that has a chance to figure it out on the outside. Don't think he's there yet, but I think that's just more of a function of the offense that he played in more so than his own skills.
Yeah, I think he moves like an NFL X receiver. Like especially on slant routes and curl, like some of the shorter stuff, he really shows you good movement skills. And I agree with you. I've seen people knock it like his contested catch game or like his hands and stuff like that. And he'll have irritating drops every now and again, but he tracks the ball well downfield. I think he's got a lot of potential there. Some of the RP metrics in his profile are very, very similar to George Pickens coming into the NFL. And he's another guy, like the media and the government don't want you to know that George Pickens had more problems with drops last year than Deontay Johnson did. And we know that Pickens has like those highlight reel catches. And I think Perry probably doesn't necessarily have that type of upside, but if you're talking about like a Diet Coke version, Bud Light version of George Pickens, I think A.T. Perry makes sense there. The last guy I'll throw at you here, and I guess you haven't seen Jaden Reed. He's the closest thing I can give you to like a quote my guy in this class. 5'11", 187 pounds. Charles, I swear he's like, and I don't know if he ever gets there, but he's like 2 tweaks away from being a really, really good player. He's another guy that you see like Zay Flowers plays all 3 spots. You see him play X, you see him play flanker, you see him play slot. Not the biggest guy in the world, so I could see him maybe being a flanker slot type, but pretty similar game to like a Terry McLaurin, in my opinion. Like not there in terms of as great as McLaurin is as a route runner and contested catch players, but like 2 tweaks, and I think Reed can get there. Like he's a great developmental receiver that I think you take in the 3rd round. And, for me, I think in terms of the tweaks, like he shows you the ability to win above the rim despite the size, but he struggles occasionally to bring those passes in. So again, a little bit of work there, a little bit more in terms of like timing his leaps. I think if he gets better with that at the catch point, he'd be a great player. And the route running stuff, again, sometimes he plays with great rhythm and tempo. Sometimes he's a little more lax with it. If he's really just tighter on those fundamentals as a technician in the route running game, I think he could be a starting receiver in the league.
Cool. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, you'll take my word for it. Yeah, but I think he's a good sleeper. Good sleeper in terms of a guy that I think that could he's another smaller player, but a player who could win above that size. Well, anyone else worth mentioning here? I'll throw a couple names at you, and if you have seen any of them or someone that's not on my list that you've seen, let me know. Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, Rashee Rice, Kayshon Boutte, Tyler Scott. Tyler Scott's been getting some buzz. I have not been able to get any 2022 film on him, so if you're out there listening,
I haven't heard of him.
Yeah,
where'd he go to school?
Cincinnati.
I'll look into it.
Yeah, if you can help me out, that'd be great, Charles. If anyone out there is listening could give me some 2022 film on Tyler Scott, I would appreciate it. But he's the one guy on this list I haven't seen anything of. But anybody else stand out to you either from that list or anyone else in the class worth mentioning?
I think Kayshon Boutte is interesting just from like you were projected to be like a 1st round pick. What the hell happened, man?
Yeah.
And then he's kind of had a weird offseason where I can't remember any time I've seen someone like stand on a 29-inch vertical at the combine. Like usually you just try and just see if you can do better.
He blew it at the combine and then was like, I'm good at the pro day.
Yeah. And then, you think about him not getting to play in the last game at LSU and some of the other stuff. We'll see what happens with him. But he was a guy who was a big time recruit and even had interest like from Alabama as a transfer last summer. So we'll see what happens with him. And then a guy, there's 2 guys that scouts have talked to me about. one that you mentioned, Rashee Rice from SMU. Haven't seen him, but he's a guy that a lot of guys have mentioned to me. And then another guy that I also have not seen, but it's got a lot of buzz when you ask around is this guy, Michael Wilson from Stanford. I think he only had 400 yards last year, but apparently he's the guy that people have liked when they scout Tanner McKee. So we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get to Wilson. He's on my list for kind of the guys I'm going to have like mini samples of. Interesting player for sure, but I haven't seen much of him. Rashee Rice, I mean, he's probably the worst graded receiver in reception perception from the last 3 years, but I've had people point out that he played like the entire season on like a fractured foot or a fractured toe, so that would make sense. But he does show he's so inconsistent because he'll win downfield, he'll win contested, he'll show some good separate, like he'll blow past guys, stack players beautifully on a 9 route on one play, and then like the next 3 plays will be a complete disaster. But again, maybe that's because he was hurt his final year, which is the only season I really took in of him. And I'll just mention Tank Dell real quick. He's like 166 pounds or something like that. And I think he's pretty over. Like, people talk about him as one of the best route runners in the class. I don't know about that, but you mentioned Taylor Gabriel earlier. I could see him being like a Taylor Gabriel type of like gadgety receiver.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're going to get guys, I don't know, guys that can really play with a ball in their hands, I think you just kind of throw them out there and see if they can figure it out. But I've seen a bit of Tank Dell, and I like his game a lot too. But, the smaller stuff is going to knock you down the board a little bit.
He looks small too. Like when you watch him, I'm like,
he's tiny out there.
yeah. I'm like, who's this fella running around out there? I mean, I'd look ridiculous running around in college football, that's for sure, but for different reasons. So, interesting class for sure. I'm glad we kind of feel the same way about some of these players, but also like just the class as a whole. I think that these guys we talked about on day 2 are going to be really interesting in this class and potentially give you like really good long-term role players. But Charles, put the feelers out there. Get me some Tyler Scott stuff, because people love this guy. Some people compare him to like Tyler Lockett. I don't know, and Lockett's one of my dudes, so we'll see.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I just checked my archive. I only have Cincinnati defense, so I'll see what I can find.
Yeah, I can only get the defense, which like give me a break. I don't need that. But all right. Charles, that's going to do it for us. I appreciate you. Tell the people about the All Juice team and everything else you've got working on draft-wise.
Yeah, so the All Juice team, me and Charles Robinson have been working on it. It comes out next Wednesday, I believe, or maybe next Monday. Or no. It comes out on Monday. The All Juice team, which is a tribute to our old friend, Therese Paylor, who passed away a couple years ago. He ran, his All Juice team, which is basically 22 guys from the 1st through 7th round that he liked in terms of, effort, attitude, performance. So basically what we've done is work this like a real NFL team where we're scouting guys and then calling around just to talk about the makeup of these guys. And we've come up with a pretty good team of 23 guys. We got, it's 3 guys for the 1st round, 2 for the 2nd round, 2 for the 3rd round, and then 2 for every round through UDFA where there's 1. So we have 23 guys in the team. I think it came out pretty well, and you get to see that on Monday. And your sneak peek is A.T. Perry is one of the wide receivers.
Love it. Well, I can't wait to see who the other receivers are on the team, and I'm sure you guys will break that down on UPod to win the game as well, which everybody that's listening to this should be subscribed and listening to that podcast. And I know you're not, so you should. Okay, so go there and make sure you're doing that. Definitely check out everything that they talk about on the pod about Therese and the foundation and the All Juice tee or hoodie. Make sure you check into that as well. So go listen to the podcast just for that, for God's sakes. But for the meantime, that's going to do it for us. Shout out to you, Charles, for joining us. Next week, we continue our teams that will shape the draft series with participants from the infamous double doink game of the 2018 season. The Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Bears. Andy Behrens and Dalton Del Don are going to join me for that. If you listen to this podcast, I bet you can guess which guy will be talking about which team. That should be a good one. Until then, we're out.